Oh, yeah, it's kind of like
Oh, man.
Good? Check audio.
like in the end. I don't know how to edit
Okay.
Yeah, there, yeah.
Do you have any ideas? I mean, it doesn't matter.
Are you hearing noises? Yeah. You have audio?
What's the main idea? What's the main idea? I haven't even looked at it.
No, just something like scrap together. Scrap the game
Ladies and gentlemen, hello! Thank you! I'm now beginning the Skype call. And yes, it's a Skype call because I don't have the Discord video stuff because I'm on Discord.
I got it. Part 2D Wonderland.
Please make sure the stream is switched. Hi! Can you hear us? Okay, we can't hear you right now. We can hear you, just not well. Okay, wait, we're good. I think that worked.
Is that okay now?
It is. All right.
Cool.
So, thank you very much for coming, for quote-unquote coming to the interview, Mr. Hudson. I guess I should start by saying, why don't you introduce yourself to the members of the club?
Oh, hi. By the way, I don't have video on, do I?
You do not. If you want, it's up to you.
Let's see. Can you see me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
How's it going?
So, my name's Kent Hudson. I made the Novelist as an independent developer. I also worked in like AAA game development for like 10 years before I went indie. I released a game last year called Near Death as an indie, and now I'm working at a VR startup. And I don't know, do you have more specifics you wanted to hear, or
anything you thought you'd like to share with us before we started, I guess?
I don't know, I guess that's kind of it. That's kind of what I've done.
All right, so just since I didn't explain how this sort of works beforehand, I'm acting as the moderator. I have a list of questions that I can ask him. If not, it will go to you guys. If you guys would like to ask him something, think of Mr. Hudson as a resource for you guys to develop as game makers, I suppose. So with that, are there any questions? I'm assuming you have a question. Okay. Oh, you do. Yes, you may come up to the hot seat, which is what it's for, Matt. Sorry.
So I saw you worked on Bioshock 2. That was as a lead systems designer?
Yeah.
So when working with Bioshock 2, Bioshock 1 was highly successful at the time. So in the company, was there like a intense pressure to follow up on that? Or how did the success of the first game impact the challenges of the second?
That's a good question. I don't think we ever felt like a pressure, like, oh crap, we're gonna screw this up, or wow, like it didn't ever come from a fear perspective. I think that whenever you see, because it was a unique situation, for the sequel, we actually built the 2K Marin studio as well. So it was a brand new studio made just to make Bioshock 2. So that combination of events basically meant that everybody who got started at that new studio, who got hired, was a fan of Bioshock. Like, we all went there to work on that. So it wasn't like a lot of times at game studios, you don't get to pick what you're going to work on, or corporate will say, hey, here's your next project. But for us, we were all like there because we love Bioshock and want to make the sequel. And a huge percentage of the leadership team actually had worked on Bioshock 1 as well. So I think it was more of like a healthy respect for the job that we had to do. I think we kind of were just worked hard and knew that we didn't want to screw it up. But it wasn't, I wouldn't call it pressure. It was more like a respect for the original, that we wanted to kind of honor the quality of that and improve on it where we could. So Yeah, but it was a always kind of a positive vibe. I guess that happens whenever you have the leadership team coming from having worked on the original. Kind of we kind of thought of it as we were like playing in someone else's sandbox when we made it, because it's a big advantage when you work on a sequel because you know what worked and what didn't work on the previous game, and so you kind of have like. There's so much you don't have to do. You don't have to do so much of the world building and finding the art style and deciding what kind of gameplay you're going to have. So whenever you have those legs up, I think it was like honestly just more like excitement to try to do it justice.
Okay, and then I have one more question. So how does a systems designer differ from just generic game designer?
That's another good question. I think that game designer is more of an umbrella term, and then you've got systems. I mean, the breakdown I've usually seen in my career is that game designer is like an umbrella term, and then you've got systems designers and level designers, and so it's kind of like a subset of game designers, I guess. And they bleed into each other a lot because those two disciplines have to talk a lot. Like if a systems designer makes a really sweet cover system in a first-person shooter, and then the level designers don't drop any cover, then it's it's pointless. So like there's a lot of collaboration there as well. But I think it's just a more specific term than game designer. There's also free-to-play game designers, and there's cinematics designers and stuff like that. So I think it's more of just a subset and a specialization, I guess.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
No problem.
Go ahead.
So, at the beginning you mentioned that maybe even right now you got into VR, if that was correct. I was just kind of curious because I keep hearing about it more and more now, and we got a VR lab on campus. I was kind of curious how you got into that position, or what made you start doing VR.
That's a good question. I'm going to say that every time, but that is a good question. If you're just like, what's the best Halo game? I'm going to be like, you're fired. But yeah, that's a good question. So basically, after I shipped my second game as an indie developer last year, I had a kid 2 weeks after I shipped my game. And so I was like, man, the indie life is no longer a responsible way to live because it's just really volatile financially. So I started looking at like what companies I wanted to go join. And I just happened to hear about a job at a place called Oculus Story Studio, which was unfortunately shut down in early May. Yeah, early May. But they were kind of like the leading VR storytelling studio, so it's actually not games. It's more focused on sort of interactive VR movies. And it was just an interesting challenge. I'd kind of been doing the same thing for like 15 years. I'd been making games, and I felt like I kind of knew everything that I wanted to know about it and accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. And so it was just a really interesting challenge to change it up, because like in VR, there's so many things you take for granted in games that you can't take for granted in VR, and it's a totally different interactive language. So honestly, it was just a fertile new, area to explore that I was just really excited about trying to help figure out. And a couple people I'd worked with before were also at Oculus Story Studio, so I kind of knew the team was really good, and it was just a fun challenge, frankly. Like I'm always kind of looking for just something that's new or something that's different or something that's not been done before. I don't want to just like go work on another Call of Duty shooter or whatever. Like I want to try to explore new stuff. So it was really just curiosity and a cool team and a cool opportunity. It just kind of came together at the right time.
Perfect, thank you.
Go ahead.
Hi. So, game design is kind of like a pipe dream for me. I love playing games and seeing, or like trying to think like why they made certain choices or how they're trying to like influence a player. But my main concern is it's not a really stable career, and it's very easy to get stuck in a job you really don't like. So is there a safe approach to getting into the field?
That's a tough one, because you're right, it's pretty volatile. I mean, like it's volatile on a company to company level. Like it's not volatile in the way that like it's not a fad. Like video games are more successful than ever. They're making more money than ever. It's not like video games are going to go away, but it's very, very volatile company to company because it's a very hit-driven industry. So if you've got one game that doesn't make its money back, the publisher says, oh, that team, you know, it doesn't matter how good the game is because it's all based in money. So you make a great game that doesn't make a lot of money, nobody cares. They're like, oh, shut that team down or lay these people off, etc. So when you go into it, you have to definitely be prepared for a certain level of that kind of uncertainty where, yeah, like any company could get shut down. Like when Story Studio got shut down in May, that was the third time that I've been at a company that had closed. And like, I don't know if this is ironic or not, but I was indie for 5 years, which is much longer than any job I ever held in the game industry. So I think you just kind of have to accept and embrace that is a possibility that like any company you're at might go under. But and there are really long-term stable companies that are really great places to work. And if you don't get in on one of those, you know, that's awesome. But I think it's it's not something to go into if you're looking to just have steady work and have a low stress, low drama environment. Like if you want that, then you can maybe go be an accountant or something where that you're gonna have steady work every year. There's always gonna be tax day. But I wouldn't let that discourage you from it. I mean, like, I'm an old guy now, like I'm 38, so, like I have a decent amount of career to look back on. I mean, I remember thinking the same thing when I was in college because I didn't know what I was going to do and I was worried about going into games for the same reasons. And like, I don't regret it at all. Like I've had projects canceled, had 3 companies get shut down. At one point I worked on a game for 3.5 years and it got shut down without ever being announced, and so it's just a huge gap in my career. But it's like anything. Like what you take from it is the friends you make, the things you learn. Like that 3.5 years wasn't wasted. It was probably one of the most like learning intensive periods of my career. So like even though the game didn't come out because the company went under, like it's unfortunate, but I don't regret it. Like I don't look back with any regret. So you just have to kind of accept that that's a possibility that's always going to be there and try to make the best decisions you can. Try to look for companies that are going to be more stable than others, but I wouldn't let that dissuade you because, you get severance when it happens and you can collect unemployment if you have to, and, there's health insurance with Cobra. So, I wouldn't, if games are something you're passionate about, I don't think there's hardly any safe careers, like that you're really passionate about. So just, I don't know. Kind of roll with it and cross your fingers and try to make the best decisions you can. But if it's what you love, then follow it,
All right. Thanks. Cool.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay, so since a lot of us here have actually broken up into groups to do our own project around the theme, I believe it's Big Brother this semester.
It is, yes.
It's Big Brother this semester. Are there any tips that you could give some of the groups about how to work cohesively?
Boy, that's a very broad question. I'm like trying to figure out how to.
I guess since you're more so a designer, having worked on the Novelist and Near Death, which I didn't know was released, how would, let's say, multiple programmers, or maybe in your AAA experience, how would you work with someone who's coding the system?
Well, I would. So one thing I would say is that. Don't get too hung up in sort of discipline boundaries. Like a programmer could have a great game design idea. A game designer could have an awesome idea for a music cue. A sound designer could have a great idea for how a gameplay mechanic would work. Obviously, you want to defer to the people in the specialties because they have a specialty for a reason, but always trying to create an environment where people feel free to share their ideas and share feedback in a constructive way. Classic things like, attack the idea, don't attack the person, and trying to be like positive communicators, I think is really big. Also, like working together as much as you can, by which I mean, don't on Monday, everybody has a task list and we kind of write up a bunch of stuff we're going to work on the week, and then you just go work in a corner for the whole week without talking to anybody and sit head down and do your stuff and pop up at the end of the week and say what everybody else did. It's really good to like, I don't know what your working rhythm is in terms of how often you're able to get together and work on your projects, but having a daily check-in, working in an open pit environment, like where your desks are together and you can kind of talk to each other the whole time, pulling people over no matter what your discipline is and saying, hey, what do you think of this? Or hey, can you give me some feedback on that? And just really trying to have behaviors that are open and collaborative, as opposed to siloing off and kind of sticking your head down and getting territorial about your work. Those are things that work well. What else? Not getting too bogged down in like paper design and over planning things, I would say. I would try to avoid that because ultimately all that matters is what's on the screen, and that's what you're ultimately going to ship. You can't ship a design doc with the game. You don't get to come with the game and explain things to your players. So all they've got is what's on screen. So as soon as you get anything playable, I think it's really valuable to have the whole group together, pass the controller around and play it and see how things are working and talk about ideas and generate ideas that way and listen to the game instead of saying, well, oh, we discovered this new mechanic that's actually really fun, or we discovered this unexpected thing about this work we did this week, but the schedule says we got to do this, so we got to stick over here. Like, don't be afraid to adapt and say, hey, let's just dive deep on that, and don't be afraid to change the game towards it. But a lot of it just comes down to, again, like sitting together, talking as much as you can, playing each other's stuff, and just trying to be open and collaborative as opposed to, kind of siloing off. Those things have helped me a lot. I actually did a GDC talk about this in 2010. I used the AI on Bioshock 2 as an example of like we had a cross-discipline group that had programmers, effects people, animators, artists, all different disciplines. And we developed some good like working habits for how to collaborate and get things done. So I think that talk is also free on the GDC Vault. Not that I'm trying to like plug it, like I don't get money from it or anything. It's just more like I spent a lot of time thinking about this and communicating it, and that might be a good resource. It's free, so check that out. And it's like an hour long, so I can't recount it all here. Open groups, open communication, and like encouragement and collaboration.
Cool. So you mentioned that you worked on paper prototypes, and you also had a prototype for the Novelist that you called Ghost. So how did you how did you prepare for making the Ghost? What did you know you wanted to have in it, and what did you know you wanted to not have in it yet?
So you're basically talking about how did I come up with that first prototype of the Novelist that before it was the Novelist? Right. So the like very, very genesis of the idea was just being frustrated about like it started with a core of being frustrated about how games were getting more and more like cinematic, i.e. really long cutscenes, non-interactive, sort of walkthrough type gameplay, and then that like really strong dissonance between like I shoot people in the face during the gameplay, and then I have these like deep character moments during cutscenes when I'm not doing anything, and so from the very start, that was the kernel of the idea that I wanted to build on, was trying to build a game where the narrative and the gameplay were more connected, and you were actually changing the story through your gameplay and not changing it, or actually having the ability to change it all. Not a lot of games have that these days. But basically, it started with that idea, and so the first simulation I built was just like a first stab at, and that's the one I call the Ghost prototype. Was a first stab at just some ideas, and so I did a little bit of paper design, but I mostly just kind of wrote a long list of notes and just started building stuff. And the problem I ran into was that I made a bunch of systems that interacted, but they didn't tell a story. It was just a bunch of like, it's kind of easy to make random simulations that are just kind of some math under the hood. It's not that hard. But to give them context and meaning, you need, like a more of a narrative framework for things to make sense. Mm-hmm. And so the thing I built was just a weird simulation. It wasn't like as charming as The Sims, but it didn't have a story, and you didn't know who the characters were, and you didn't care about them, and you didn't know like, where's this going? What am I doing? Why do these decisions matter? Do these, a story needs a context and a framework and stakes and characters that you understand. So basically, I spent about 3 months building that simulation, and I just realized it wasn't working. Like every time I played it, I was like, what is this? Like, and so a lot of, like basically, when I started trying to build the Novelist, it wasn't the Novelist. It was this other thing about dynamic stories that I just kind of had this idea about wanting to build an interactive narrative engine. And I basically, like, the first prototype, I wouldn't call it a failure because I learned a lot from it, but it wasn't good. Like it was it didn't work. Like it taught me, I learned a lot from what it did poorly, that then is how I corrected into making it the Novelist, which did have a narrative framework and it had a small number of characters. One of the biggest sort of like leaps, and it's not like super revolutionary, but one of the biggest leaps was just that like in that first prototype, there were just like 6 characters that were just kind of blank slates, and there was no predefined relationship between them, so you had no context for why you would try to make 2 people like each other, or try to make 2 people fall in love, or try to break up a couple, because you're just like, I don't know who these people are, I don't know anything about them, I don't know why I care about any of this, you know, like, and it was just this very bland mechanical simulation, and so that's why I made the Novelist about a family, because there's no explanation needed. Everybody knows what parents and a kid are. Like, everyone has been a kid, everybody had parents, like, you know, it's a context that people immediately understand, and you immediately have your own conception of what being a good parent means, what being a good partner in a relationship means, what being good at your job means, or being good at your passion. So I kind of like cut straight to the chase and reduced the number of characters into something that actually had a built-in meaning. And so that's something that I learned from that first prototype and was one of the sort of major like changes I made. But it came with basically like, I had a problem I wanted to solve, and the first time didn't work, but I just looked at it and said, well, what doesn't work, how do I make it better? And the second time did. So that's kind of what I mean about like not getting too lost in paper design, because I probably have more paper design for that first prototype than I did for the Novelist. And you can have so much stuff that sounds great on paper and gets you excited and seems to make sense and it seems like it all fits together. Then you build it and it just doesn't land. And again, kind of what I said, like all that matters is what's on the screen. So like as soon as you make something, you want to look at that and see what works, what doesn't, react to that, and keep iterating on it and changing it until you build on what's good about it, solve the problems that are broken with it. So basically, yeah, like it started as an experiment that didn't work, and I learned what didn't work and went from there.
Actually, I have a question. So, I heard that you talk just now about don't get caught up in the paper design. For the past few months, I've been trying my hand at writing design documents and such, and I've definitely gotten that feeling where why am I writing this when I should just be coding the game? But it is necessary to have some form of like written concept for what you want. Are there any tips you recommend for finding that balance? Or
Sure. Yeah. Actually, someone asked me about this the other day, so it's kind of fresh on my mind. And the thing I realized is the way that I like to think about it is it's sort of like, have you ever heard the phrase like plans are useless, planning is priceless?
No.
Or like no plan survives first contact with the enemy. It's basically like the value in writing, like, because I definitely think you're right. There's value to having some documentation, but to me the value in it is the actual process of writing it, because you're basically externalizing your thought process, and like by having to think through something and write about it, it makes you think deeply about it, and actually all of that deep thinking about it and sort of like following design decisions in your head, because as you get more and more experience, you start to learn like, oh, this is a good idea, but wait, 3 steps down the road with all these other ideas I've got, this is going to be a problem. And so you can kind of like really quickly mentally prototype or mentally troubleshoot or avoid future problems. So the value of design documentation is it's almost like a free writing exercise where you are using it as a tool to sort of work through thorny issues or figure out tough problems or help find your way into a problem. Like sometimes you know you want to solve something, you just don't know, you don't have a way into it. So sometimes I'll just like write big bullet lists of different ideas, and like even just writing, like don't be afraid to write down a bunch of bad ideas. Yeah. And say like, because even if you can identify why something is bad, it gives you a little bit of a better idea of what would be good. Like identifying what's wrong with something helps you hone in on what's right. So the value to me of design documentation is, it's a way to externalize your thought process, and it's more that like the writing of it can be helpful, but once it's written, Other than keeping around as like a reference, if you're like, oh, why did I do that again? You don't want to like rely too much on it, because what happens is, let's say that you're working on something and you write a big design doc, you start working on the game, and inevitably the game is going to change. All of a sudden that design documentation is out of date because the game just changed away from what you wrote. And then someone new comes on the project and you're like, oh yeah, check out our design docs. And they're reading something different than what's on screen. Then you've got to go back and say, oh crap, no, we changed that, that, and that. Oh crap, I've got to update the documentation. All of a sudden the documentation becomes like a burden, like to keep it up to date with what's in the game. Whereas you should just be focusing on what's in the game and letting people play the game and see what's there. So I would say keep it high level. Also have an idea of like what's useful to you as a thinking tool versus what's good for external facing review of the documentation. Because like it's definitely good to have like a high level one pager.
Yeah.
But as soon as you get in, if you get too low level on feature design or like here's our list of 6 weapons or whatever the game is, then you're creating something that's kind of cumbersome and almost more trouble than it's worth because you feel this burden to keep it up to date while you're working on the game. So I guess it's like finding, try to find the right level of detail to where it's helping you remember what the game is about and what decisions you've made and why, but it isn't this monolithic amount of text that you're constantly going back and updating or, using as reference when you really don't need to, compared to like being able to just look at the game. So yeah, did that help at all?
Yeah.
More specific questions?
Yeah.
I feel like I kind of rambled.
No, yeah, that was great. I have another. Have you ever had experience doing like a remote team? So, like.
One person, one place, the other person.
Yeah.
Like states away.
Yeah.
I've tried doing projects like that, and as an indie developer, I don't have money to go pay people to keep them motivated. How have you is it just finding the right people, or is there really like a duty to whoever kind of starts the project to maintain the momentum, or like?
Yeah, that is a super. I wish there was an easy answer to that. That is one of the hardest things in game development. I've seen. One of the main reasons the 2K Marin fell apart and why XCOM was such a bad game and why the studio ultimately closed was because we were mandated to make it in like 3 different locations, and it just killed the studio. Like the same team that built Bioshock 2 just quit and spread to the wind. And I've seen it go bad. I've basically never seen it. It's never as good as having everyone in the same place. I've never really seen it go well. It's kind of like all degrees of trying to make it less bad, but it's never optimal. It's never what you want.
Yeah.
And as an indie, I've also had remote people, and I think
That's not a good sign.
it's hard. It hasn't always gone wrong, but it is what you said about finding the right people, because if you can't pay them, then you kind of have to find people who believe in your thing as much as you do, and have their own drive and desire to complete it. No one will just work for you and do what you tell them to do indefinitely for free. Most people don't want that kind of experience. So it's like, if you can find people who are passionate about the same things that you are and who find interesting work for themselves to do in your game, then that's your best hope of finding people and trying to look for people who have completed projects before, because there's nothing easier than starting a project.
Yeah.
There's nothing easier than building a prototype and getting all excited about the final version of something and being like, oh yeah, we're 1% of the way there. The other 99% is a slog. So definitely it's about finding the right people who you're friends with or who you've worked with before, who you trust. But yeah, it's a super hard problem working remotely. And the only times I've really had it work, like on the Novelist, I didn't really have any remote people. I paid a company to make the 3D artwork, but I did all the rest of it, so all the rest of the game. So I didn't really have that problem on Near Death. My composer was remote, but he was working. I paid him, so he had that motivation. Yeah. Our writer was working for just back-end profit sharing, and I think he did it just because, and he was great. And in his case, he just found it to be an interesting project to work on. and we'd all worked with each other in the past, and so it was just fun for us. Like we had a good time working on it, and so if you find people that you just enjoy working with, where you like their ideas, they like yours, you joke around during the day, and you have like a good positive working energy with them, that helps a lot. And sometimes it won't work out. And if you feel like something's not working out, talk about it with them a couple times. And if it's okay to part ways, like it doesn't have to be acrimonious. If it just isn't coming together, then don't be afraid to just say, hey, I don't think this is working anymore. Let's just call this off and remain friends. Another thing that can really help is opening up downloading, getting Slack, and like setting up a team in Slack, and just say, hey, everybody, keep it open during the, if you can work together at the same time, even if you're remote, because even just like just having chat during the day, like and just sending funny links or being like, hey, where'd you put that file again, or whatever. Just having that kind of communication can help ease some of those issues, because you still feel like you're kind of working with someone. So that can help a lot, but yeah, it's really, really hard to do it remotely. And yeah, you're kind of going uphill, and sometimes that's the only way. So I'm not saying don't do it ever, but you just have to it's also a good idea to be really frank with people up front and say like, hey, look, this might be a 6 month or 1 year project, and I'm in it for the whole thing, and if you don't think you can commit to that, let's just not start. Like I need to, and kind of getting people to commit to it, because then you can say, hey, look, when we started, you committed to this. You promised me that you were going to, and then they're putting their own sort of credibility on the line, and it's less about what you need from them, or like, it's more like, hey, you gave me your word. Like, are you going back on your word? So, and obviously life stuff comes up, but when you get people to commit to their own goals, that's a pretty powerful motivator, because it's something they signed up for, which kind of flips it around.
You've probably made a bunch of game prototypes in your spare time, but when you're between releases or full-on projects, do you ever have times where you just want to stop making games for a few weeks and then kind of just let it sit out and then go back and kind of start back up with new energy? Or how do you keep the energy of when you're in the prototype phase?
After a project, and like if you're releasing commercially, like the project's not done when it ships, you've got like weeks or months of support afterwards. So it can, if you're looking for like, oh, we shipped and now I'm just going to take 2 weeks off, like that usually doesn't happen. So you kind of have to temper your expectations there. But yeah, like I definitely like to take some downtime and kind of get my head out of it, because like if you both of my indie games took a little under 2 years to make, and so when you're doing it professionally and it's your day job,
you're staring at the same thing all the time. Yeah.
So like it's definitely really good to get away from it when you can. But yeah, I usually have some downtime, and then after that I just start kind of looking for what's exciting to me, or what's like an interesting challenge. And then I threw away the first 3 months of the Novelist when I made it. Near Death, I started a different game between the Novelist and Near Death, and got 3 months into that one with 2 other guys, and we decided it wasn't working, and so we broke that up. Then I built the first prototype for Near Death, was another 3 months, and it, just like the one on the Novelist, like told me all the stuff I didn't want to do, and I threw that away and started over. So there's definitely an exploratory period. Like don't be afraid to, like don't be so devoted to something that you just follow, put good money after bad. Like, the whole goal of prototyping is to learn lessons, and to answer questions. And so you might not get the answer you want, but as long as you're being honest and listening to it, it will give you the information you need to go forward. So yeah.
What engines did you use? Did you use Unity, or did you build your own? Or
I used Unity for both my indie games. I used Unreal for my entire professional career before that, and I'm back in Unreal now for the project I'm working on now. But I used Unity for both my indie games. Don't build your own engine. Just don't.
Okay.
It's an impossible amount of work, and you spend so much time in the engine, you're not even making a game. Whereas like Unity and Unreal, you can download for free. And just like, it's the little things. It's just like, oh, I want to put some music in this prototype. Do you want to spend like 2 weeks integrating some buggy open source library and like following these bad form threads on GitHub because you get this weird driver error and blah, 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 blah. Or do you just want to have Unity and just drag the file into Unity and hook up a sound thing in your level and play it in 30 seconds? Like, it's hard to underestimate how much you get for free and how much you take for granted when you use a pre-made engine versus like all the hard work just to get the bare bones up and running. Now, if you want to be an engine programmer, like if programming is your passion as opposed to game design, then building an engine is a great exercise. Like if you want to learn how to be a real technologist, but if you're excited about a game idea because of the creative goals of that idea, or because you've got something personal to say through this game, or you've got interesting aesthetic goals, or like you're excited about the game itself and those ideas, use something that gets you on screen as fast as possible. Because like at this point, they're free, and there's great documentation, there's great forum threads, especially for Unity. The Unity community, you can't find a problem that someone else has not solved if you just Google it, you know? So it's just such a resource, and you just get such a leg up by using a pre-made engine.
So nowhere in the professional career they all used Unreal? They never had a custom engine or anything?
Who?
All throughout your professional career, they've only done Unreal?
Yeah, me personally, and I guess that just happens to be the kind of games I've always worked on. I guess have been suited to Unreal. Some studios build their own engines. You know, I think like Bungie has always built their own engines, but they've got like some of the most like frighteningly scary, like intelligent engineers up there who like they've got a whole crew of people whose passion is building engines, and you know that's part of the DNA of their studio. And I think Bethesda might make their own engines as well. So you know people have done it. I've worked at companies that have started to rewrite some off-the-shelf engines, and it was always a disaster. So, but that might have been situational. So who knows, you know, if that's like golden rule advice or whatever. But yeah, most studios use some version of licensed technology.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Oh, the other good thing about like licensed engines is like you can get on any platform. Like Unity, you can put a game anywhere. Like you make your game in one place, and you can put it on all the consoles, Mac, PC, Linux. Just that alone is a huge advantage to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Cool. So I'm gonna more switch to like your indie area. How did you take into account like budgeting and like filing for a company and things like that? When did you decide to file for a company? I'm more interested in that side. So could you explain that?
Sure. Yeah, good question. So when I first quit, I basically had I quit my job at the end of 2011 to go indie, and just because I was like really unsatisfied where I was working, and I had no plan, I had done no research, but me and my wife had saved up some money, kind of in the eventuality of one of us doing our own thing, and it just happened to be me. So we had some savings, which is the first thing. We had savings to kind of like cushion the blow of losing my salary and living only on her salary, and I didn't really know anything about companies and copyrights and trademarks and stuff like that. And so I didn't register a company. I didn't really start registering a company until probably about a year after I'd been working on my game. At which point I just used LegalZoom to register an LLC, which is kind of all you need. Like, it's basically you just want that like level of protection that if someone happens to for some reason sue you about your game, they're just suing whatever that LLC has, as opposed to like coming after your car and you know coming after your bank account. Not that like really anyone ever sues anyone over video games. Like it's kind of one of those things you kind of have to have it in the eventuality of something crazy happening. But you know, most of the time it's like a really lightweight thing where you just kind of you register with LegalZoom. They you know, and I'm sure there's other services. I'm not like trying to shill for them. That's just what I used. But yeah, so do that. And trademarking and copyright, are you curious about those at all?
Yes,
as
I am.
well?
Yeah.
So trademarking and copyright are two totally different things that I got confused when I looked into as well. But do some research on whether or not those are worthwhile. Like I filed a trademark for my company name. I never copyrighted either one of my games because, and double check me on this, I think I'm getting this right, but don't take this as gospel, but it's something similar to this, if not exactly this. But so just creating a work and releasing it gives you copyright automatically. Like you get the copyright to a work just by creating it. It's not like if you don't register the official copyright, anyone can take it or steal it. Like just the creation of the thing gives you common law copyright. The reason to officially register a copyright, which is a long process that can take a while, it costs money, you've got to fill out all these forms, deal with the government, blah, 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 is that in the case of a copyright lawsuit or some kind of legal action around that copyright, if it is a officially registered copyright, like with all the paperwork and forms and government thing, as opposed to a common law copyright, which is what you get just by doing the work, if it's official, then you have the ability to recoup your legal costs in the case of like just a bizarre legal action. Like, so if you make a game and someone sues you and says, hey, that was my idea, or oh, I want a piece of that, or like, I think you stole that from my book, or whatever, like, regardless of whether or not that's true, if you have to go to court, you still lose that money. You know, even if you win, unless if you have the official copyright, then you can actually sue to recover those costs. And as far as I know, that's the only difference, or the main difference to do that. But yeah, you get copyright just by creating the work.
Okay. And another thing is, how did you really manage your time? And I'm guessing you had to work with other people also. So how would you, I guess how did you delegate your tasks also? So the first one is, yeah.
Sure. So managing my time, when you're working indie and you don't have like an office or like got to be at class at a certain time or whatever, like if you have a totally unstructured day, it can actually be pretty hard to make sure that you're like working as hard as you should be working. The thing that helped me the most was I just started logging my hours every day. So I'd sit down and I'd say, okay, I sat down at 9:45 whenever I sat down, and I went to lunch this time or whatever. And at the end of the day, I would see how much I worked that day. And I started noticing, like, man, I only work 6 hours a day. Like, what, 5.5 hours, 6 hours, like what? And I basically was just, I looked at my sheet and I was like, man, I'm burning my savings right now. I'm out here on my own and I'm not even working 8 hours a day. What is wrong with me? And just like seeing the numbers made me buck up and like get serious about putting in my time. And so that basically gave me my structure to my day, which is like, I started realizing, like, look, if my butt's not in a seat by 9 a.m. and I don't keep my lunches to like 30 minutes or 45 minutes and I'm not done by this time, I'm not working hard enough, you know? So just like seeing my hours reflected back was kind of all I needed. And then you asked something about delegating tasks.
Yeah, how did you manage your other team members and delegate the tasks?
That's a good question. I used, I think on the second game I used Asana, which is just like a free task management thing. And I think that unfortunately a lot of my ability to manage my time and prioritize things and keep on schedule and cut things preemptively to save myself time and stay on track and stay on schedule, I think a lot of it was just from having 15 years of industry experience before I did it myself, to where I could just recognize things and like I can just look at a task and be like, that sounds simple, that's a week of work. Okay, I just need to know that's a week of work. And so I built myself a high level schedule, and it's, like, do the best you can, build a schedule, and then track yourself and be honest with it. I had the benefit, like I said, of having done it for so long that like I can eyeball stuff and be like, okay, that's gonna be too much time. Okay, this is gonna bite me, and that just comes with experience, which I know like when you're just starting out, you kind of don't have those instincts honed. But build yourself a schedule that's as realistic as you can make it, and then you have to be really, really honest with yourself as you track your tasks. So if you break it down into like 2-week sprints or whatever, and it's gonna be a 6-month project, I'm gonna check in every 2 weeks, and you notice that like you miss your first 3 sprints or your work keeps going over, you basically like, once you see that you're starting to slip stuff or miss stuff, or that your task estimates were not right and you didn't budget enough time, or you run into unexpected problems, as soon as you realize that things are kind of off the rails, be honest with yourself and be brutal about looking ahead in the schedule and saying, okay, look, I thought this was gonna be 6 months. Right now I'm tracking to where this is gonna be 10 months. Just if I just extrapolate out, I'm going right now. So I've got to cut some stuff, or I've got to bring this in, or I've got to like shrink the rest of the schedule to make it work. Because if you just lie to yourself the whole way and just say, oh, I'll make it up, I'll make it up, I'll make it up, and you don't ever react to the fact that you keep missing your 2-week sprints, then you just end up with this massively overdue thing. And so a lot of it is just about having personal accountability to recognizing like, oh, wow, I keep missing my deadlines. What's going on here? Another really good trick that producers will do that you can apply to your schedules as well is, for me, I never book more than 4 days of tasks in a week. Like, even though it's 5 days on my schedule, I only will task myself for 4, because I don't know what's going to come up. I just know something's going to come up. And so you just build that buffer time in. And if you're starting out and you're trying to build those instincts and try to get a sense of how fast you work and what your rhythm is and how much unexpected stuff happens and this, that, and the other, you might only want to book 3 days a week. And just so that like you're building that buffer time into your schedule, because the thing you don't want to do is build a schedule that's like, hey, I'll make my date if everything goes right the entire way. Because as you know from doing, projects at school or any personal project, stuff never goes how you expect. Things always take longer. So if you build a schedule that's like booked 5 days a week for 6 months and there's no room for any slippage, you're already setting yourself up to fail. So if you're just starting out, maybe only do 3 days a week, because that way you're going to force yourself to be really, really conservative. And like, guess what? Like, if you're actually getting your stuff done on time and you've got those 2 extra days a week, start pulling in stuff from the next week. Like, if you get ahead of schedule, that's a great problem to have. If you book yourself really conservatively and get ahead, awesome, great work. Like, you want to be in a place where you've got that time to add more stuff in or polish at the end. Because one thing that teams always, always, always wish they had more time, or wish they had, was more time at the end of the project. Because right at the end of the project, when things really come together, and when you really find out what the game is, and you really understand the like special features that are going to set the game apart and are going to really make it sing and take it from like, a 7 out of 10 to a 9 out of 10 kind of thing. And you always find that out at the end when you really work on the game, really understand it. And if you're, coming in at the end of a project and you finish it with 2 days left, you're going to know all the things you want to do and not have time to do it. So if you can get to something playable earlier, then you'll thank yourself for having the time. So yeah, I guess book yourself very, very conservatively so that you have that buffer time. You'll never be sad about having more time on the project. You'll never be sad about getting ahead on the schedule, but be very, very sad if it goes the other way. So
Yeah.
All right.
those are some tricks, I guess.
Thank you.
Sorry about the announcement.
That was unfortunate timing.
So I've tried to start on a lot of games and just projects in general on my own, but it's always really daunting because there's so much to learn and there's so much to do, and I don't know what to do first. So how do you manage that and kind of go one step at a time and actually start to build a project?
So are you asking specifically about like just managing that sense of like being overwhelmed about stuff, or like keeping the momentum going, or?
Kind of that, but also like just how do you start? Because I've tried to start and it feels like there's too much to learn and I can't possibly do it all. So like where do you start? How do you do that?
Yeah, if you're feeling really overwhelmed by that, then I think one thing that would really help is pick something really small that has like a specific thing that you want to learn out of it, and finish it. Like pick something like really small. Like if you say, hey, look, I want to learn how to do vector graphics, then make a tic-tac-toe game. And you're like, oh, tic-tac-toe, that's dumb. And it's like if you make a tic-tac-toe that you finish, that works, that you learn how to make vector graphics, then you're like, hey, that's a tool in my tool belt, and I finished something. Because like it's easy to start. as everybody knows, it's easy to start and be excited about something, and then it hits you like a ton of bricks when you realize how much work is left. So it's better to finish something small, and then the next time, pick something a little bigger, Because if you never finish anything, you'll always have that unsatisfied feeling that you're talking about of like being overwhelmed by it. So don't be afraid to just make something really tiny. Like even give yourself like, look, I'm gonna give myself 4 hours to make whatever I can make in 4 hours. You know, like and give yourself artificial constraints to make yourself finish things that are really small, and just kind of keep getting bigger. You know, pick things that are bigger and bigger each time. Once you build your confidence, to know that like, okay, now I know I can finish something. Okay, let me try something bigger. Okay, I finished that. So, you know, don't set out from the very beginning to like write War and Peace. You know, like don't set out with these huge goals, because it's just always going to feel too intimidating. And the thing that will buy you, by which I mean finishing small things, is that like that feeling you're describing never goes away. The feeling of, oh my God, this is too much. I can't do this. I should give up. It's impossible. Like that never goes away. You will always have that emotional feeling, because big projects take years and years. And when you see what you want to have at the end, and you look at the blank screen in front of you, it's going to feel overwhelming. It's going to feel crushing. But if you've kind of like gotten your reps in on finishing smaller things, and then it looks slightly bigger thing, you kind of are basically able to say like, look, every one of those things I learned a lesson. I've gotten my confidence up. I've learned how I work. And like, I guess just like allow yourself to feel those emotions, because it's a real emotion, and it's often a good signal that maybe what you are, you know, biting off might be too big. But that feeling never fully goes away. So getting your reps up on smaller things that get progressively bigger will build your confidence, and also you'll learn a lot along the way. So yeah, so don't bite off the huge one right at first. Don't be afraid to do something small.
Okay, so since I don't want to take up too much of your time, I'm just gonna go with one more question, and if anyone else has anything, we can do that at the end.
Yeah.
Then why don't you come up?
Sorry.
Go on. Everyone else did
find my
it.
way through the long tables on this thing. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
So I was wondering if there was any project that you've worked on in the past that you haven't finished that you wish you could revisit, or if there is an idea that you have that you wish that you could tackle but maybe has too much scope for.
Yes to all of that.
Okay.
Let's see. Like one thing that I wish that I had done that I never really did, that it kind of creates that is that on the Novelist, all the music for the game is procedurally generated. Like I wrote like a procedural piano player algorithm. So, and it's actually like kind of robust and has a bunch of really cool sliders and tools, and you can be like, oh, play it faster, slower, major key, minor key, a lot of chords, no chords, lots of, you know, individual notes, slow, fast, you know, like you can modify all of it, and when you play the game, it's all kind of randomized. And I always wanted to like build a standalone app that was just like a little piano playing app that just like takes that stuff that I did in the game and just puts it in little non-game things, just like sitting at your computer listening to piano music, just to make it nice and peaceful and relaxing. And it wouldn't be that much work to like build a UI for it, but I just never quite get around to it.
And make a good Unity plugin too.
What'd you say?
That'd make a good Unity plugin too. You could release it on the Asset Store.
Totally. Absolutely. I have no disagreement with what you're saying, but for whatever reason, I just haven't gotten around to actually doing it. Yeah, I'm trying to think of other ones. I mean, like, I think I've probably got more, like, just game ideas I'd like to do that either are just, like, where I need 10 people and I just don't have the energy to try to get a 10-person indie team together.
Thank you.
Yeah. By the way, Outer Banks, North Carolina, are you from North Carolina?
I'm not, but I have been there.
Okay, cool. I grew up in North Carolina, so I'm just curious.
Yeah, no, not from there. I'm actually from California.
Okay,
Thank you.
Cool.
Appreciate it.
Cool. So I guess since no one else has any questions, I guess the last thing I would like to ask, well, second to last thing I should ask is related to the Novelist, since we are going to be playing that and my thing went to sleep. So the Novelist, I think I would highly recommend that everyone who hasn't read his GDC about it, you should read it. It's very interesting. Your solution to the zero-sum problem is really interesting to read as well. But I was curious how you integrated the game mechanics into the Novelist, given that it's such a since the acts are randomized and the story isn't constant. Like, how did you decide what the player would do in something like that?
I don't understand exactly what you're asking.
How
you mean like the low-level mechanics of the game, or
low-level mechanics? Like how did you get it all to work?
Tons and tons and tons of failure. Basically, is the answer. Like there were a lot of gut punch play tests where I tried stuff early on. So things like the memories and that you can explore. Things like I did. Like the first couple of playtests of the game that I sent out to my friends and family was like, "Hey, I'm working on this game. Check it out." The feedback was just brutal. Like it was just like I would every time I read one, I was like, "I need to lay on the floor face down for about an hour, and then I think I can work after that." So a lot of it was just things that didn't work, and then I play tested, and was lucky enough to have people who were honest. They weren't, jerks about it, but it's just like, hey, this is really confusing, or this doesn't work at all. So tons of playtesting basically was the answer to a lot of that, because there was stuff that just didn't conceptually make sense, or conceptually made sense but didn't pay off in the right way. Like at the end of chapters, there's those little black and white still scenes that kind of show what happened, show the consequence of your actions. Early versions of the game just had the typewriter come up and type out what happened, like over a black screen. And people were like, that's just so unsatisfying. They were like, it's so, I did all, I thought about all this and you're just going to give me like 3 lines of text. Like, that's like, people just hated that. And I'm sitting here thinking like, well, I can't afford cinematics. I can't afford like custom VO. Like, what am I going to do? And so that was just like, people were like, well, this part of your game sucks and you need to do better. And I just thought for a long, long time, and finally it hit me. I was like, oh, I can do these little, posed scenes that show without having to animate everything, because I already have those character models. And it actually turned out to be like a really cheap content solution, because I had the character models and that, I had obviously the set in the house. So I was able to put those together pretty easily. But it was a result of playtest feedback. And I had a lot of playtest feedback about how we didn't see the family interacting as much as they should have. And that's still, I think, a fair criticism of even the final game. But it's another thing, I just didn't have the budget at the time to do really complex stuff at runtime. But that's why I added those memories where you see 2 characters interacting like in a frozen pose. I was like, okay, with these frozen poses, without a lot of animation time, I can create something that at least gives people some sense of that. So I think a lot of it is just that's really hard and it really hurts, and you just have to allow yourself to be vulnerable and take some time to let the sort of sting cool off, and then come back to it and say, okay, good, this is good feedback, I've got to figure out a way to address it. Okay, I'm over the emotional blow of it, let me try to actually solve this rationally or whatever. So yeah, I would say playtest early, playtest often, and trust your playtesters. Because a ton of the features in that game were just I tried 3 things first that didn't work, and you just keep listening to people. So, that's a pretty big one.
Okay, and I guess the last question, as always, would be, is there anything else you'd like to tell us about game design? Because I know you have a lot to say about story and stuff.
I would say, I guess my best advice is kind of what I was saying earlier is you're only ever going to learn how to do this by doing it, and you will learn more by finishing things than, finishing one thing than starting 10 things and leaving them unfinished. Finishing stuff is really, really hard. and that's where you really get your reps, and that's where you're really forced to make difficult decisions. So pick something that's achievable and finish it. And with the lessons you learn there, pick something slightly bigger next time and finish that. And that really, really does help. Yeah, be open to playtest feedback. Find people you trust, work with people you trust. Life's too short to work with jerks, so work with people who you have fun with. And yeah, like, I don't know, like I don't know. This sounds so corny, but like, listen to yourself and kind of follow your heart on it. Like, if it's something you believe in and something you're passionate about doing, then just do it, no matter what anybody else tells you. Like, it's all out there for you. There's free engines. If you got a computer, you can make something. And if you make something and finish it and share it with the world, then you won. So there you go.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Hudson. Can we get a round of applause for him? Thank you. Thank you so much for the interview. Hope you have a great evening, and congratulations on the kid.
Cool. Thanks a lot. It's
Yep.
good talking to you guys.
You too.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Oh, he hung up this time, so I didn't have to. Okay. Awesome. So that was it. Thank you all. Did the stream work out fine? Because you didn't ask anything.
Yeah, stream shot.
Okay, cool. If you want, there will be a VOD of this. If you want to recap on anything he said on the YouTube channel. We will release the VOD if you want to know what everything happened on the YouTube channel. Okay, bye.